What's the one thing every avoidant secretly hopes you'll do after they push you away? Most people think avoidants reject you and then forget you exist. Wrong. They reject you and then wait. They watch. They monitor how you handle their rejection because your response determines whether they get to keep their carefully constructed story about themselves intact. There's a specific reaction they're hoping for. Something that would make their rejection feel completely justified, while simultaneously protecting them from any real consequences of their choice. Something that would let them walk away feeling superior rather than guilty. Something that would give them exactly what they want, without them ever having to ask for it. But here's the twist. If you give them exactly what they're hoping for, you accidentally hand them something they don't deserve while robbing yourself of something you desperately need. The thing they wish you'd do isn't obvious. It's not dramatic or emotional. In fact, it's so subtle that most people do it automatically without realizing they're playing directly into the avoidance psychological strategy. And once you understand what this behavior is and why they crave it so desperately, you'll never look at rejection the same way again. But before we get to what they're secretly hoping for, you need to understand what they're counting on you to do first. Picture the typical aftermath of rejection. Someone gets hurt, confused, maybe a little desperate. They start analyzing what went wrong. They reach out for explanations. They try to fix things or at least understand them. This is exactly what avoidants count on. Your confusion validates their decision. Your attempts to understand prove you care more than they do. Your efforts to reconnect demonstrate that they have power over your emotional state. But it goes deeper than that. When you react predictably to their rejection, you're essentially writing their story for them. The story where they're the rational one who made a tough but necessary choice. Where you're the emotional one who couldn't handle their honesty. Every text you send asking, "What happened?" becomes evidence that they were right to distance themselves from your emotional needs. Every attempt you make to salvage things reinforces their belief that they're too mature for this kind of drama. While you're trying to process the end of a relationship like any normal person would, they're interpreting your natural responses through their own lens. What feels like reasonable questions to you gets filed away as confirmation that they made the right choice. Think about how this plays out in real time. You send a thoughtful message asking for clarity about what went wrong. To you, this seems reasonable. You're trying to understand and learn from the experience. But to them, this message becomes evidence of exactly why they needed to create distance. Your need for understanding gets reframed as something else entirely. Meanwhile, they screenshot your messages to friends, not out of malice necessarily, but to confirm their narrative. See? This is exactly why I had to end things. They can't just accept it and move on. Your pain becomes their proof that they made the right choice. What's particularly challenging about this dynamic is how it creates a situation where any response feels wrong. Reach out and you're being persistent. Don't reach out and you're proving you never really cared. React emotionally and you're too intense. Don't react and you're cold or fake. But here's what's really happening. They're not actually analyzing your behavior objectively. They're looking for confirmation of a decision they've already made. Your responses don't determine their narrative. They just provide convenient evidence for a story that was already written. This is why understanding their psychology becomes so important. Once you realize that your reactions are being filtered through their need to justify their choice, you can step back from the impossible task of trying to respond correctly to their rejection. There is no correct response that will make them see things differently because they're not looking to see things differently. The game is designed for them to win, regardless of how you play it. The only winning move is to recognize the game for what it is and choose not to participate in it on their terms. Meanwhile, they get to walk away feeling enlightened, evolved, superior to all that messy emotional stuff that normal people deal with. So what is it they're really hoping you'll do? Here's the behavior they desperately want, but would never admit to wanting. They want you to disappear completely and thrive without them. Quietly. Without explanation. Without making them look bad. Without revealing their role in your pain. Sounds backwards, right? But think about what this would give them. If you vanish and clearly do better without them, they get to tell themselves they were holding you back. That ending things was actually a gift to you, that they sacrificed their own potential happiness for your greater good. Imagine how perfect this narrative would be for their ego. Instead of being the person who rejected someone who loved them, they become the wise one who recognized incompatibility early. Instead of being the one who caused pain, they become the one who prevented greater pain down the road. Your thriving validates their decision without making them feel guilty about it. Your absence means they don't have to deal with any consequences of their choice. Your silence means they never have to explain themselves or confront how their actions affected another person. It's the ultimate win-win for them. They get confirmation that leaving was right, proof that you're better off, and freedom from any responsibility for the aftermath. But there's an even deeper psychological benefit they're seeking. When you disappear and thrive, you're essentially proving their core belief about relationships, that people don't actually need each other as much as they think they do. That emotional independence is not only possible, but preferable. This validation is crucial for someone whose entire identity is built around not needing people too much. Your success without them becomes evidence that their approach to relationships is correct, that all those people who crave deep emotional connection are actually just weak or codependent. In their mind, your ability to move on quickly and successfully proves that they were right to avoid getting too attached in the first place. You become living proof that their emotional detachment is actually wisdom rather than limitation. This is why they secretly hope you'll just disappear and flourish. It would make their rejection feel like an act of love rather than an act of cowardice. But why does this fantasy appeal to them so much? You need to understand something about how avoidants process relationships. They don't just struggle with their own emotions. They struggle with being responsible for other people's emotions. When they reject someone, they're not just ending a connection. They're trying to escape the weight of knowing they've hurt another person. The guilt of causing pain conflicts with their need to protect themselves, creating an internal tension they can't easily resolve. Your disappearance and subsequent success would resolve this tension perfectly. No guilt because you're clearly fine. No responsibility because you handled it independently. No reminders because you're nowhere to be found. Think of it like returning a gift you never wanted. If the person you return it to immediately exchanges it for something better and seems happier with their new choice, you feel relief instead of guilt. That's what your thriving disappearance would provide them. But there's another layer to this. Avoidants often struggle with the fear that they're not actually as independent and self-sufficient as they pretend to be. Deep down, they worry they might need people more than they're comfortable admitting. Your ability to move on and thrive without them would validate their core belief about independence. It would prove that healthy people don't actually need specific individuals to be happy. That attachment is optional rather than essential. This confirmation would be incredibly reassuring to someone whose entire identity is built around not needing anyone too much. There's also a practical element to why they want you to disappear and thrive. It eliminates any awkwardness or complexity from their social life. No mutual friends feeling torn between you. No uncomfortable encounters at shared spaces. No reminders of their decision walking around their social circle. When you vanish successfully, you're essentially cleaning up the social mess that their rejection might have created. You're making their life easier by removing any potential complications or consequences that might arise from ending things with you. This convenience factor matters more to avoidants than most people realize. They don't just want to avoid emotional complications. They want to avoid practical complications too. Your disappearance and obvious success means they never have to deal with questions from friends about how you're doing. Never have to navigate social situations where you might both be present. Never have to face any external pressure about their choice. You become the perfect ex, gone, thriving, and requiring zero maintenance or consideration on their part. Now, here's where things get interesting. When someone actually does what the avoidant secretly hopes for, disappears and thrives, the results are more complex than either person expects. Yes, Initially, the avoidant feels exactly the relief and validation they were hoping for. Your absence confirms their choice. Your visible success proves they didn't ruin your life. They get to maintain their story about being the rational one who made the hard but correct decision. But something else happens too. Something they didn't anticipate. Your complete indifference to their existence becomes a mirror, reflecting their own emotional limitations back at them. If you can move on so completely, so successfully, what does that say about the connection you shared? What does it say about their impact on your life? The same disappearance that initially validates their choice eventually makes them question their own significance. If you're genuinely thriving without them, were they ever actually important to you? Or were you just temporarily attached to the idea of them? This creates a different kind of discomfort. Not guilt exactly, but a subtle questioning of their own worth. They wanted confirmation that leaving was right, but they didn't want confirmation that they were forgettable. You'll notice this shift in their behavior months later. Suddenly, they're checking your social media more frequently, making casual inquiries about you through mutual friends, finding excuses to be in places where you might appear. They got exactly what they thought they wanted, but it turns out that being easily replaced isn't as satisfying as being difficult to forget. This brings us to the most important part. How understanding all of this gives you back your power. When you understand what avoidants secretly hope for after rejection, you gain something invaluable, the ability to choose your response strategically rather than reactively. Most people's natural response to rejection is to seek understanding, closure, or reconciliation. These responses are normal and healthy in many situations, but with avoidance, they often backfire because they feed into the exact narrative the avoidant wants to create. But when you consciously choose to disappear and thrive, you're not giving them what they want out of weakness or hurt. You're giving them what they want as a strategic choice that serves your own growth. The difference is crucial. When you react predictably to their rejection, you're operating from a place of emotional overwhelm. When you strategically withdraw and focus on your own flourishing, you're operating from a place of personal power. This approach forces them to confront the reality that their rejection doesn't devastate you, that your happiness isn't dependent on their approval or presence, that you have the emotional resources to not just survive their absence, but actually benefit from it. For someone whose power comes from being the one who cares less, your genuine indifference becomes deeply unsettling. They lose their position of emotional superiority when you demonstrate that you don't actually need their validation to thrive. But here's what makes this approach so powerful. It's not about revenge or manipulation. It's about genuine self-respect. When you choose to focus on your own growth rather than trying to understand their rejection, you're making a statement about your own worth that goes far beyond this one relationship. You're declaring that your energy is too valuable to waste on someone who doesn't appreciate it, that your emotional resources are better invested in your own development than in trying to change someone's mind about you, that you trust your own judgment about your worth more than you trust their assessment of it. This shift in focus creates a ripple effect in your life that extends far beyond the person who rejected you. You start making choices based on what serves your growth rather than what might win someone's approval. You begin to see rejection not as a verdict on your worth, but as valuable information about compatibility. The beautiful thing about this approach is that it works regardless of the avoidance reaction. Whether they notice your absence and question it, or whether they feel validated by your disappearance, you benefit either way. You're not doing it for them, you're doing it for you. When you choose to focus on your own flourishing after rejection, you're practicing a skill that will serve you in every area of life. You're learning to derive your sense of worth from your own growth and achievements, rather than from other people's validation or approval. This is particularly powerful because it breaks the cycle of seeking external validation that keeps many people stuck in unsatisfying relationship patterns. Instead of trying to prove your worth to someone who's already decided you're not worth their investment, you invest in yourself. The psychological shift from "what did I do wrong" to "what can I do right for myself" changes everything. It moves you from a position of self-doubt to a position of self-advocacy, from defense to offense, from reaction to action. But more importantly, you gain something essential: proof of your own resilience. Evidence that you can handle rejection without falling apart. Confirmation that your worth isn't determined by one person's inability to appreciate what you offer. One final thing to consider: the timing of how you do this matters more than you might think. The key to making this approach effective isn't just what you do, it's when you do it. Immediate disappearance after rejection can look like hurt or spite. But if you take a few days to process, maybe send one brief, mature response acknowledging their decision and then vanish, that reads differently. It reads like choice rather than reaction, like strength rather than weakness, like someone who respects their decision enough not to fight it, and respects themselves enough not to beg for reconsideration. The timing signals emotional maturity rather than emotional overwhelm. It suggests you're disappearing not because you're devastated, but because you recognize incompatibility when you see it. This distinction matters because it determines whether your absence validates their choice or challenges their assumptions about your emotional dependence on them. Have you ever given an avoidant exactly what they secretly wanted after they rejected you? Drop a comment about how that played out in your situation. If this helped you understand the psychology behind rejection and response, like this video and subscribe for more insights about taking back your power in difficult relationship dynamics. Thanks for watching.